The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Cedar Grove. The town was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets didn't stay hidden for long, except for the ones that really mattered. It was a warm summer evening, and 16-year-old Marcus Carter was sitting at a picnic table in the local park, his laptop open in front of him. He wasn't just another teenager browsing social media or playing video games. Marcus was different, quiet, thoughtful, and always tinkering with something. He had a knack for coding and a passion for creating things most people his age wouldn't even think of. He was working on a project he'd been dreaming about for months, a website aimed at helping local kids access resources for school and community programs. As Marcus typed away, lost in his work, he didn't notice the patrol car pull up at the edge of the park. Officer Jack Reynolds stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel path. Reynolds was known around town for his no-nonsense attitude and a reputation for being a little too quick to assert his authority. He was a man who believed in order and discipline, and he didn't care much for explanations. Marcus glanced up briefly when he heard the footsteps, but didn't think much of it. He figured the officer was just making his rounds. That was until Reynolds walked straight toward him, his hand resting on the baton clipped to his belt. "Young man," Reynolds barked, his tone sharp, "what are you doing out here?" Marcus blinked, taken aback by the sudden hostility. "Just working on something," he said, gesturing to his laptop. Reynolds narrowed his eyes, scanning the scene like a detective piecing together a crime that hadn't happened. To him, a teenager alone in the park with a laptop at dusk didn't sit right. He didn't ask questions. He didn't try to understand. Instead, he made assumptions. "Working on what?" Reynolds demanded, stepping closer. "You hacking something? Up to no good." Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. "No, sir," he replied, his voice steady but cautious. "It's just a project for school, nothing illegal." But Reynolds wasn't listening. In his mind, he'd already decided what was happening here. Without warning, he grabbed the laptop. "Hey," Marcus exclaimed, standing up. "That's mine." Reynolds didn't hesitate. With a quick, forceful motion, he slammed the laptop onto the edge of the table, the screen shattering with a sickening crack. The sound echoed through the park, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Marcus stared in shock, his heart pounding. He couldn't believe what had just happened. "That'll teach you to mess around," Reynolds said, his voice cold. But what Reynolds didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Marcus wasn't just any kid. He was the son of Police Chief David Carter, a man who had spent his career trying to build trust and accountability within the community. And as the sound of the shattered laptop faded into the evening air, Marcus pulled out his phone, his hands trembling. He wasn't going to let this go. The story was just beginning. Marcus' hands shook as he unlocked his phone. The adrenaline coursing through his veins made his thumb fumble on the screen, but he finally managed to open the camera app. He turned it on the officer, capturing Reynolds' stern face and the wreckage of his laptop still lying shattered on the table. "What do you think you're doing?" Reynolds demanded, his voice rising. "I'm making sure everyone knows what just happened," Marcus said, his voice firmer now, though his chest still tightened with fear. He didn't know where this sudden burst of courage came from, but he wasn't about to let the officer intimidate him into silence. Reynolds took a step closer, and for a moment, Marcus thought he might try to snatch the phone. Instead, the officer pointed a finger at him. "You're asking for trouble, kid," he said. "You don't want to mess with me." Marcus didn't flinch. He kept recording. The tension hung heavy in the air as Reynolds finally turned away and stormed back to his patrol car. The sound of the engine starting echoed through the quiet park, and within seconds, the car was gone, leaving Marcus standing there with his shattered laptop and the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. He looked at the broken device on the table, the screen a web of cracks, the keys dented from the impact. Months of work gone in an instant. His project, his ideas, everything he poured himself into was now a pile of useless metal and plastic. But the worst part wasn't the laptop. It was the way Reynolds had treated him, like he didn't matter, like his only purpose in that moment was to be put in his place. Marcus picked up the pieces of his laptop and placed them gently in his backpack. He didn't cry, though he wanted to. He didn't scream, though every nerve in his body felt like it was on fire. Instead, he started walking home, his mind racing. When he reached his house, the lights were on, and he could see his dad sitting at the dining table, reading over some papers. Chief David Carter was a tall, imposing man with a calm demeanor that commanded respect. He wasn't just a leader in the police force, he was a leader in the community. People trusted him, and he had worked hard to earn that trust. Marcus hesitated at the front door, wondering how to tell his dad what had happened. He knew his father wouldn't take this lightly, but he also knew the risks of stirring up trouble within the department. As he walked inside, his dad looked up, immediately noticing the tense expression on Marcus' face. "Hey, kiddo," he said, setting down his papers. "You okay?" Marcus didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into his backpack and pulled out the broken laptop, placing it on the table in front of his dad. Chief Carter's eyes widened as he took in the damage. "What happened?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. Marcus took a deep breath and told him everything: the officer in the park, the accusations, the way Reynolds had smashed the laptop without a second thought. He even showed his dad the video he'd recorded on his phone. As the video played, Chief Carter's expression darkened. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "Jack Reynolds," he said finally, almost to himself. "I should have known." Marcus frowned. "You know him." His dad nodded. "Reynolds has been on the force for years. He's a bit of a hothead. Always has been. I've had to talk to him more than once about his behavior." "So what are you going to do about it?" Marcus asked, his voice sharp. Chief Carter looked at his son, the weight of the situation evident in his eyes. "I'll handle it," he said. "But Marcus, this isn't just about Reynolds. If we're going to address this, we need to do it the right way." Marcus crossed his arms. "The right way? He smashed my laptop, Dad. He treated me like I was a criminal for no reason. How is that okay?" "It's not okay," Chief Carter said firmly. "And it's not going to go unanswered. But if we rush into this, it could backfire. We need to be smart." Marcus wanted to argue, but he knew his dad was right. Still, it didn't make him feel any better. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the incident in his mind, each detail sharpening his resolve. He didn't just want justice for himself, he wanted to make sure this didn't happen to anyone else. The next day at school, Marcus told a few close friends what had happened. They were outraged, especially when he showed them the video. His best friend, Jaden, was the first to speak up. "This isn't right, man," Jaden said. "You can't let him get away with this." "I'm not," Marcus said, "but my dad wants to handle it the right way." Jaden rolled his eyes. "The right way? What does that even mean?" "It means waiting," Marcus said, though the word tasted bitter in his mouth. But as the day went on, Marcus began to wonder if waiting was really the best option. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about him. There were probably other people in town who had been treated unfairly by Reynolds or officers like him. Maybe they hadn't spoken up because they didn't think anyone would listen. By the time Marcus got home that afternoon, he had a plan. He set up his phone on a stand and hit record. "Hey, everyone," he began, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "My name is Marcus Carter, and I want to tell you about something that happened to me yesterday." He went on to recount the incident, showing clips from the video he'd recorded and explaining how he felt. He didn't name Reynolds outright, but he made it clear that what had happened was wrong. "I'm sharing this because I know I'm not the only one," Marcus said, looking straight into the camera. "If you've ever experienced something like this, I want you to know that you're not alone. And if you're ready to speak up, I'm here to listen." When he finished recording, Marcus uploaded the video to social media. He wasn't sure what to expect, but within hours, the responses started pouring in. Some were supportive, praising Marcus for his courage. Others shared their own stories, some of which were eerily similar to his. But not everyone was on his side. There were comments accusing him of exaggerating or trying to stir up trouble. As the video gained traction, Marcus felt a mix of emotions: pride, fear, determination. He knew he'd started something bigger than himself, but he also knew that the fight was far from over. Back at the station, Chief Carter watched the video with a heavy heart. He admired his son's bravery but worried about the storm this would bring. He knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. And as Marcus refreshed the video's comments late that night, a new one caught his eye. "I've been waiting for someone to speak up," it read. "You're not alone, Marcus. Let's talk." Marcus stared at the comment, his mind racing. He didn't know who had left it, but he had a feeling this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Marcus stared at the comment on his video, his thumb hovering over the reply button. The words lingered in his mind. Asterisk, "You're not alone," asterisk. It was the kind of reassurance he hadn't realized he needed. He tapped the comment and typed a quick response, thanking the person and asking them to reach out privately. The next day, while scrolling through messages during lunch, Marcus noticed one from an unfamiliar account. The username didn't give much away, but the message was direct. "I've had my own run-ins with Officer Reynolds. Let me know if you want details." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his chest. It wasn't just him. There were others. He responded immediately, setting up a time to talk after school. By the time Marcus got home that evening, he had a long list of stories from people who had shared their experiences with Reynolds and other officers who seemed to abuse their power. Some stories were small, like being unfairly ticketed, but others were much more serious. One woman claimed Reynolds had threatened to arrest her teenage son for loitering while he waited outside a store. Another man described how Reynolds had pulled him over 3 times in 1 month for no reason he could figure out. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than just a few incidents. It felt like a pattern, one that had gone unnoticed or unchallenged for too long. He decided to share the stories he'd gathered in a new video, keeping everyone's identity anonymous, but making it clear that this wasn't an isolated problem. The response was overwhelming. His second video went viral, spreading beyond their small town. People from neighboring communities started chiming in, sharing similar stories about other officers. The comments section became a hub for people looking for solidarity and change, but it also drew criticism. Some accused Marcus of trying to smear the police force or creating unnecessary tension in the community. At home, Chief Carter watched the unfolding situation with a mixture of pride and unease. He admired his son's determination, but he also knew how dangerous this could become. The police department was already buzzing with talk of Marcus' videos. Some officers were defensive, claiming it was all exaggerated. Others, though, admitted privately that they'd seen Reynolds cross the line more than once. One evening, Chief Carter called Marcus into the kitchen for a talk. The weight of the conversation was evident in his father's face. "Marcus," he began, "I need to know, are you ready for what might come next?" "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, though he already had an idea. "This isn't just about Reynolds anymore," his dad said. "What you're doing is brave, but it's putting a spotlight on the entire department. Not everyone's going to react well to that." "I'm not trying to make enemies," Marcus said, his voice firm. "I'm just trying to make things better." "I know," Chief Carter said, "but not everyone sees it that way. Some people see change as a threat." Marcus nodded, but he wasn't about to back down. If anything, his dad's words made him more determined to keep going. The next day, as Marcus walked to school, he noticed a black car slowly trailing him. It wasn't the usual patrol car, and it didn't have any markings, but it was enough to make him feel uneasy. When he stopped at a crosswalk, the car stopped too. By the time he reached school, the car had turned down another street, but the encounter left him rattled. He didn't mention it to his friends or his dad, not wanting to make it into something bigger than it might be. Later that week, Marcus received an email from a local journalist. She'd seen his videos and wanted to interview him for a piece she was writing about police accountability. Her name was Clara Evans, and she had a reputation for taking on tough stories. When they met at a small coffee shop downtown, Clara wasted no time diving into the details. She asked about Marcus' experiences, his motivations, and what he hoped to achieve. But then she asked a question that caught him off guard. "Have you looked into Officer Reynolds' record?" she asked. Marcus shook his head. "I don't have access to that kind of information." Clara smiled faintly. "I do." She slid a folder across the table toward him. Inside were copies of complaints filed against Reynolds over the years, allegations of misconduct, excessive force, and racial profiling. None of them had led to any serious consequences, but the sheer number was staggering. "This is just what's on record," Clara said. "There's probably more that never made it this far." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he flipped through the pages. The pattern was undeniable, and yet Reynolds was still on the force, still patrolling the streets. "Why hasn't anything been done?" Marcus asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Clara sighed. "Because it's hard to hold officers accountable, especially in small towns. People are afraid of retaliation, and the system is designed to protect its own." That night, Marcus shared what he'd learned with his dad. Chief Carter wasn't surprised by the complaints, but admitted that seeing them laid out like that was unsettling. "We can use this," Marcus said. "We can show people that this isn't just about one bad day. It's a pattern." But Chief Carter hesitated. "You need to be careful, Marcus. If you go public with this, it's going to escalate things." "Maybe that's what needs to happen," Marcus replied. As the days passed, the tension in Cedar Grove continued to build. Marcus noticed more subtle signs that he was being watched. A patrol car parked near his school, strangers glancing at him a little too long. Even his friends began to notice. "You think they're trying to intimidate you?" Jaden asked one afternoon. "Maybe," Marcus said, "but it's not going to work." Meanwhile, Reynolds was feeling the pressure too. Word had gotten back to him about Marcus' videos, and he wasn't happy. In his mind, Marcus was just a kid stirring up trouble, someone who didn't understand how hard it was to be a cop. One evening, as Marcus was walking home from a community meeting, he heard footsteps behind him. When he turned, he saw Reynolds standing there, his hands on his hips. "We need to talk," Reynolds said, his tone more measured than before. Marcus' heart pounded, but he stood his ground. "About what?" "This crusade of yours," Reynolds said, stepping closer. "You think you're making things better, but you're just creating problems." "I'm not the one smashing laptops," Marcus shot back. Reynolds' jaw tightened, but he didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned in, his voice low. "Watch yourself, kid," he said. "You're playing a dangerous game." Marcus didn't move until Reynolds walked away. As soon as he was out of sight, Marcus pulled out his phone and recorded everything he could remember from the encounter. He knew now, more than ever, that this wasn't just about one officer or one incident. This was about something much bigger, and he wasn't going to stop until something changed. The tension in Cedar Grove reached a boiling point as Marcus' videos continued to gain traction. People in the community were talking, and it wasn't just in whispers anymore. At the grocery store, at the barber shop, even in the hallways at school, everywhere Marcus went, he heard snippets of conversations about Officer Reynolds and the stories others had shared. Some people were rallying behind him, calling for accountability and change. Others were skeptical, accusing him of trying to tarnish the reputation of the police. Marcus couldn't ignore the shift in how people treated him. Strangers stopped him on the street to thank him or share their stories. But there were also those who looked at him with suspicion or even hostility. It was clear he had touched a nerve, and not everyone was comfortable with it. At home, Chief Carter was dealing with fallout of his own. The department was under scrutiny like never before, and some officers were growing resentful. Reynolds, in particular, was fuming. He'd filed a formal complaint against Marcus, claiming the videos were defamatory and damaging his reputation. But Chief Carter knew the truth. The videos weren't about defamation. They were about accountability. One evening, as Marcus sat in his room scrolling through the latest wave of comments on his videos, his phone buzzed with a call from Clara. Her voice was tense. "Marcus, I think you need to see this," she said. She sent him a link to a newly posted video. When Marcus clicked on it, his stomach dropped. It was footage from a body camera, but the angle was awkward, and the audio was muffled. It showed a scene from the park, but the narrative was twisted. In this version, Reynolds appeared calm and composed, while Marcus was portrayed as confrontational and uncooperative. "This is fake," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "I know," Clara replied, "but whoever leaked it wants to discredit you. They're trying to flip the story." Marcus felt a wave of anger and frustration. It was one thing to face criticism for speaking out, but now someone was actively working to undermine him with lies. "What do we do?" Marcus asked. "We fight back with the truth," Clara said, "but you need to be ready. This is going to get messy." The following day, Marcus uploaded a new video addressing the doctored footage. He explained how the body camera footage had been manipulated and showed his original recording to prove it. But even as he tried to set the record straight, he couldn't shake the feeling that the people behind the fake video wouldn't stop there. Meanwhile, Chief Carter was working behind the scenes. He'd started quietly investigating Reynolds, digging into his record, and speaking with other officers who might be willing to come forward. It wasn't easy. Loyalty ran deep in the department, and many were afraid of the repercussions. But then something unexpected happened. A young officer named Sarah Jenkins approached Chief Carter privately. She was new to the force, just a year on the job, but she'd seen enough to know that Reynolds' behavior wasn't right. "I seen him cross the line more than once," Sarah admitted. "I didn't say anything before because, well, you know how it is. But after everything with Marcus, I can't stay silent anymore." Her testimony was a turning point. Chief Carter knew that with her statement and the mounting evidence, they had a real chance to hold Reynolds accountable. But he also knew it wouldn't be easy. As the days went on, the tension in Cedar Grove only grew. Marcus started noticing more strange occurrences. The black car he'd seen before was back, parked outside his school one afternoon. At night, he'd hear footsteps outside his house, though no one was ever there when he looked. One evening, as he was leaving a community meeting, Marcus noticed a group of men standing near the parking lot. They weren't officers, at least not in uniform, but their presence was intimidating. Marcus kept his head down and walked quickly to his bike, his heart pounding. When he got home, he told his dad what had happened. Chief Carter's expression darkened. "This is escalating," he said. "We need to be careful." But Marcus refused to be scared into silence. If anything, the attempts to intimidate him only strengthened his resolve. One night, while reviewing the stories people had sent him, Marcus came across an email that caught his attention. The sender claimed to have evidence that could expose not just Reynolds, but a larger culture of corruption within the department. The email included an address and a time for a meeting, but no name. Marcus debated whether to go. It could be a trap, but it could also be the break he needed. He decided to tell Clara, and together they devised a plan. Clara would follow him from a distance, staying close enough to intervene if anything went wrong. When the night of the meeting arrived, Marcus felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. He arrived at the location, a dimly lit parking garage, and waited. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the silence. A figure emerged from the shadows, wearing a hood that obscured their face. They handed Marcus a USB drive without saying a word and disappeared just as quickly as they had appeared. Marcus didn't stick around to find out who it was. He jumped on his bike and pedaled away, meeting Clara at a nearby coffee shop. Together, they plugged the drive into her laptop, their hearts racing with anticipation. What they found was shocking. The files included internal emails, reports, and even video footage that painted a damning picture of systemic issues within the department. It wasn't just about Reynolds anymore. It was about a culture that had allowed him and others like him to operate unchecked for years. As Marcus and Clara sifted through the files, they realized they had enough evidence to blow the whole thing wide open. But they also knew the risks. If they went public with this, the backlash would be intense. Marcus looked at Clara, his mind racing. What do we do now? Clara's expression was resolute. We expose the truth, but we have to be smart about it. And as they began to formulate their plan, Marcus couldn't help but feel that they were standing on the edge of something huge, something that could change everything, for better or worse. As Marcus and Clara prepared to release the damning evidence, the weight of what they were about to do settled heavily over them. They spent hours going through the files, organizing everything into a clear narrative. Clara was certain the evidence would spark outrage, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to open Pandora's box. They decided to release the information in stages, starting with the most undeniable proof of systemic issues. Clara reached out to her contacts in the media, and Marcus prepared another video to explain the significance of what they found. But just as they were about to hit publish, Marcus received a call from an unknown number. At first, he considered ignoring it, but something told him to pick up. The voice on the other end was low and unfamiliar. "You don't know me, but I know what you're planning," a voice said. "Be careful. You're not the only one who knows what's on that drive." Marcus froze. "Who is this?" "That doesn't matter," the voice replied. "What matters is that you're playing with fire. If you go public, you might not like what happens next." Before Marcus could respond, the line went dead. His hands trembled as he lowered the phone. When he told Clara about the call, her face tightened with concern. "Someone's trying to scare you," she said, "but it means they're onto something big." Despite her confidence, Marcus couldn't shake the unease. He started double-checking everything, his locks, his surroundings, even his phone settings. He felt like he was being watched, and the paranoia was starting to wear him down. 2 days later, the tension escalated. As Marcus was walking home from school, a police car pulled up alongside him. At first, he thought it was a routine patrol, but then he recognized the officer behind the wheel. Reynolds. Reynolds rolled down the window, his expression unreadable. "Get in," he said. Marcus hesitated. "Why?" "Just get in," Reynolds repeated, his tone cold. Marcus glanced around, hoping someone might see what was happening, but the street was empty. Against his better judgment, he opened the door and slid into the passenger seat. Reynolds drove in silence for a few minutes before pulling into an abandoned parking lot. He turned off the engine and leaned back in his seat, staring straight ahead. "You think you're a hero, don't you?" Reynolds said, his voice low but sharp. "Posting your little videos, stirring up trouble. You don't have a clue what you're messing with." Marcus stayed silent, his heart pounding. "I've been on this force for 20 years, Reynolds continued. "I've seen things you wouldn't believe. You think it's all black and white, but it's not. People like you, kids who think they know everything, you don't understand how the world works." Marcus clenched his fists. "Maybe I don't," he said, his voice steady. "But I know what's right and what's wrong. And what you've been doing, it's wrong." Reynolds turned to face him, his jaw tight. "You think anyone's going to care about your little crusade? You're nothing, kid. Just a mouthy teenager who doesn't know when to quit." Before Marcus could respond, Reynolds pulled something out of his pocket, a flash drive. He held it up, a smirk spreading across his face. "You're not the only one with evidence," Reynolds said. "This town isn't as innocent as you think. You want to expose me? Go ahead. But you better be ready for what comes next." He tossed the drive onto Marcus' lap and started the car. Without another word, he drove back to the spot where he picked Marcus up and let him out. When Marcus got home, he couldn't stop staring at the flash drive. Part of him wanted to throw it away, but another part knew he had to see what was on it. He plugged it into his laptop, his hands shaking, and opened the files. What he found left him speechless. The drive contained years' worth of incriminating evidence, not just against Reynolds, but against multiple members of the department. There were emails detailing cover-ups, video footage of questionable arrests, and even financial records suggesting embezzlement. But there was something else. Buried among the files was a folder labeled *Carter*. Clara leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "That's not a Cedar Grove officer," she said. "Who is that?" Before they could figure it out, another message came through. This time it was a simple text. "You've only scratched the surface." The realization hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about Reynolds or Cedar Grove. There was a larger network at play, and they'd only uncovered the tip of the iceberg. In the days that followed, the fallout was immense. Reynolds was arrested, and several other officers resigned or were placed on administrative leave. Chief Carter held a press conference, vowing to rebuild the department with integrity and transparency. But for Marcus, the journey was far from over. As he stood on the front steps of the station, watching his father address the media, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle had just begun. Somewhere out there, the real puppet masters were still pulling the strings, and Marcus was determined to find them. The camera panned back, capturing Marcus' resolute expression as he turned to Clara. "This isn't the end," he said. "Not by a long shot." In the weeks following the arrests and resignations, Cedar Grove felt like a town in flux. The streets buzzed with conversations about the scandal, the revelations, and what would come next. For Marcus, life had taken on a strange duality. On one hand, he was hailed as a local hero by those who admired his courage to stand up for what was right. On the other, he couldn't shake the shadow of uncertainty that hung over him after the cryptic message about scratching the surface. Clara stuck by him through it all, her calm resolve a steadying force. Together, they sifted through the remaining files on the flash drive, looking for any overlooked clues that might hint at the broader network hinted at in the anonymous messages. Though they didn't find much more, they agreed to keep everything backed up and ready in case it was needed later. Chief Carter, meanwhile, was navigating the fallout with a mix of determination and regret. He'd taken full accountability during his public addresses, promising to rebuild the department from the ground up. True to his word, he brought in external investigators to ensure transparency, and he made it clear that no one, not even himself, was above scrutiny. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, the weight of the past weeks seemed to catch up with them. Marcus finally asked the question he'd been holding back. "Dad, do you think it's really over?" Chief Carter set his fork down and met his son's gaze. "I think we've taken an important first step," he said. "But the kind of change we're talking about doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take time, trust, and a lot of hard work." Marcus nodded, though his thoughts drifted back to the anonymous messages. "Do you think there's more out there, bigger than what we found?" His father hesitated, his expression thoughtful. "Probably," he admitted. "Corruption like this rarely exists in isolation. But what we've done here, in Cedar Grove, it matters. It's a signal to others that people won't stay silent anymore." Later that night, Marcus and Clara sat in the park where everything had started. The air was cool, and the distant hum of cicadas filled the silence between them. "I keep thinking about that message," Marcus said, breaking the quiet. "What if we didn't do enough?" Clara turned to him, her eyes steady. "We did more than most people would have dared to," she said. "You stood up when it mattered. You made people pay attention. That's not nothing, Marcus." Her words sank in, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to do. Clara must have sensed it because she added, "You're not alone in this. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The next day, Marcus uploaded one final video to his channel. In it, he reflected on the journey so far, the revelations, the challenges, and the impact their actions had on Cedar Grove. He didn't shy away from admitting his fears or doubts, but he also emphasized the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. "This isn't the end of the story," he said, looking directly into the camera. it's just the beginning. Change doesn't happen because of one person or one moment. It happens when we all decide that enough is enough. The video quickly went viral, not just in Cedar Grove but beyond. People from other towns and cities reached out, sharing their own stories of injustice and corruption. Marcus realized that what had started as a deeply personal fight had grown into something much larger, a movement fueled by the courage of people willing to speak out. As life in Cedar Grove began to stabilize, Marcus and Clara started to focus on their futures. Marcus returned to school with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to use his voice to advocate for change wherever he could. Clara, ever the strategist, began working with local activists to create programs that would foster trust and accountability in the community. The scars of the past weren't erased, but they became reminders of what could be achieved when people refused to look away. Cedar Grove wasn't perfect, it probably never would be, but it was moving in the right direction. One evening, Marcus found himself in his room, looking through old videos on his channel. He came across the one where it all began, the video of Reynolds smashing his laptop. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been a few months. As he watched, he couldn't help but smile. He thought about how much had changed since that day, not just in the town, but within himself. He was no longer just a kid with a camera. He was part of something bigger. Closing the laptop, Marcus glanced out the window at the quiet streets of Cedar Grove. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, he felt ready to face whatever came next. Together with Clara, his father, and the community that had rallied around them, he knew they had the power to keep fighting for what was right. And as the moon cast its soft light over the town, Marcus felt a sense of peace. The story wasn't over, but this chapter had ended the way it needed to, with hope, resilience, and the promise of a better tomorrow.